Anything from Anything, Episode 1. Today we're going to be covering primary sources, terminology, how to identify and delineate between meta and off-meta terminology, and how to apply repetition in this system. So, first off with primary sources. Primary sources are your initial study implements. The either end goal of what you're wanting to get to in what you're studying, or your textbook, or whatever sort of goal you've set for yourself with the thing you're wanting to learn. Terminology is basically how you're going to find the language that is used in the field of study you're in. So, for example, you can see that in most social situations that require specific terminology, like working out, for example, people talk differently. Like, it's just way different. Oh, there's snowplow. It's snowed recently. People talk differently. So, when you're going to a gym, sometimes people talk about different muscle groupings and stuff like that, and you might not exactly know what those are. That is your terminology. So, if we have, for example, a biology test, that's the easiest example of that biology test is probably on the terminology that biologists used for whatever, organs, different cells in the body, stuff like that. That is your terminology. Should be a decently easy concept to grasp. Next is identifying and delineating between meta and off-meta terminology. So here's where the terminology I'm going to start using comes into play. Meta terminology is essentially the current way the language of the field of study is used. So, language changes over time. Eventually, scientific language changes over time too, even though they do their best not to do that. That's why they use Latin. But people use new terms to address new things all the time. And sometimes in that interim, you have multiple terms that mean the same thing. That's what I mean by off-meta terminology. It's very possible in studying online social groups, for example, or if you're studying like the meta of a video game, there will be multiple different names for the same issue in mechanics, or the same bug, or things like that. And essentially what you want to do in looking for the line between meta and off-meta terminology is how long has it existed? If it's existed for a couple months, it's very likely not meta terminology yet, unless you're on Twitch, in which case everything's meta terminology because everything is a social group. Off-meta terminology generally is something you have to worry about in a more studious field. So if you're looking at, say, a re-emerging field like blacksmithing, has a set terminology, that's your meta terminology, and then it has off-meta terminology, which is people rediscovering it, coming up with new terms that might already exist in the previous terminology that they themselves just don't know about yet. So that's sort of what you're looking for there in breaking down how these different systems operate, because every system is made by a human being, and every human being communicates through language, so far as I know. So you're going to run into this issue where sometimes you'll learn terminology that isn't exactly standardized or isn't exactly known to all people, even experts in the field. Thirdly, how to apply repetition. It really depends on the thing you're studying. So if it's a physical activity, repetition is done through doing the thing. But if it's a mental, state you're attempting to achieve, whether that be focusing on a video game, or whether that be absorbing information, this is kind of a bad example, but repetition is generally going to apply through going over, in terms of video game study. Repetition is going to be going over different VODs, watching people playing the game, and making sure that the way the person is playing is in line with the way you want to be playing. So, you want to probably, if it's like League of Legends or Rocket League, watch Pro League play if you're wanting to become pro. That's probably your best option. If you're already doing that, make sure to poke out the terminology and then apply it. So once you know the terminology you're looking for, and you can see an example of it, bring that example up side by side to what you're doing, and then try to match it as best you can over and over again until you can eventually do it. For games like Rocket League, there are plenty of trainers and things like that that will help you with that. And there are plenty of YouTubers to also go over different ways to do things. That is the way with most fields of study. If you're going over a more academic field, that is the job of your professor to essentially be programming in that repetition for you. Now, you can take their exercise and adapt it in what I'm going to talk about in the next episode, which is how to use the prompts you're given to apply them to situations that aren't necessarily the framing of the prompt. So taking things like your dissection in biology and applying that same knowledge and practicing that same sort of reinforcement of what they're teaching you through the dissection in things that aren't necessarily doing a dissection, but you can make them that way in terms of the way you're thinking about it. So yeah, I will see you all in the next episode.